The silence in the briefing room was deafening. 37 years Admiral Marcus Sterling had served in the Navy, 15 of those commanding the most elite SEAL operations in the world. He had seen warriors who could disappear into enemy territory like ghosts, soldiers who could eliminate targets from impossible distances, and fighters who never broke under torture. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The young woman standing before him looked barely old enough to vote, yet her file read like something from a classified legend. 0 mission failures. 43 confirmed eliminations. No name, no background, no record of existence before she appeared on their radar 18 months ago. The intelligence community called her the Shadow, a sniper so precise, so deadly, that enemy forces had started telling ghost stories about her. But it wasn't her reputation that made Admiral Sterling's blood run cold. It was the small, intricate mark carved into the stock of her rifle, a symbol he hadn't seen in 25 years. A symbol that belonged to a mission that never officially existed, in a place that wasn't supposed to be on any map, involving people who were supposed to be dead. As he stared at that mark, Admiral Sterling realized that this wasn't just another briefing. This was the moment his carefully buried past was about to collide with the present in the most dangerous way possible. The question wasn't whether this mysterious sniper was here by coincidence. The question was whether she was here for answers or for revenge. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado, California. Admiral Marcus Sterling straightened his uniform as he walked toward Conference Room Alpha, his polished shoes echoing against the polished floors. At 55, Sterling commanded respect wherever he went. His gray hair was perfectly trimmed, his posture military straight, and his steel blue eyes held the kind of authority that came from decades of leading men into impossible situations. Today's briefing was supposed to be routine. The Pentagon wanted to discuss integrating a new asset into their Middle Eastern operations. What Sterling didn't expect was to find himself face-to-face with someone who would turn his world upside down. She was sitting alone at the far end of the conference table when he entered. 22 years old, maybe 23, with shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her green eyes were alert but calm, scanning the room with the practiced awareness of someone who never stopped watching for threats. She wore standard military fatigues, but something about the way she carried herself told Sterling this was no ordinary soldier. "You must be our new sniper," Sterling said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I'm Admiral Sterling. I run SEAL operations for this sector." The young woman nodded respectfully. "Sir, your file makes for interesting reading," Sterling continued, opening the folder before him, "though I notice it's missing some rather important details. Like your name, for instance." For the first time, something flickered across her expression. Not fear, exactly, but a wariness that reminded Sterling of a wild animal being approached by strangers. "I go by Maya, sir." "Maya what?" "Just Maya." Sterling leaned back in his chair, studying her. In his experience, people who refused to give their full names fell into 2 categories: those running from something and those hunting something. Both types made him nervous. According to this report, you've completed 17 missions in the past 18 months with a 100% success rate. 43 confirmed kills, all at ranges exceeding 800 meters. The longest shot recorded at 1,400 meters in hostile territory. Maya said nothing, her hands folded neatly on the table. "That's impressive work," Sterling continued. "Some might say impossible work, which makes me wonder where exactly you learned these skills." "I've been hunting since I was a child, sir." "Hunting deer is different from hunting terrorist soldier. Not as different as you might think." Something in her tone made Sterling pause. There was a coldness there, an edge that spoke of experiences no 20-something should have had. He'd heard that same tone from his most battle-hardened operators, men who'd seen too much death and learned to compartmentalize their emotions just to function. "Your psychological evaluation was unusual," Sterling said, flipping through the pages. "The psychiatrist noted that you showed no signs of trauma or stress despite your combat record." "No nigoch maris," no anxiety, no difficulty sleeping. That's not normal for someone in your line of work. Maya's expression didn't change. Maybe I sleep better knowing the bad guys don't. The door opened, and Sterling's aide, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, entered carrying a metal case. She set it on the table and stepped back. Your weapon, as requested, Chun said. Maya stood and approached the case with obvious familiarity. She input a code Sterling couldn't see, and the locks clicked open. Inside, nestled in custom foam, lay one of the most impressive sniper rifles Sterling had ever seen. The weapon was a modified Chaytak M200, but Maya had clearly made extensive customizations. The barrel was longer than standard. The scope was military-grade equipment that cost more than most people's cars, and the entire rifle had been painted in a pattern that would make it nearly invisible in desert environments. But it wasn't the impressive modifications that made Sterling's blood turn to ice. It was the small symbol carved into the wooden stock near the trigger guard. The mark was no bigger than a quarter, carved with obvious skill and precision. It showed an eagle with its wings spread, but not just any eagle. This eagle had a lightning bolt clutched in its talons, and beneath it were 3 small lines arranged in a specific pattern. Sterling recognized that symbol because he'd seen it before. 25 years ago, in a classified operation that was supposed to never be discussed again. Where did you get that mark? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya looked up from her rifle, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, Sterling saw something unexpected in her eyes. Pain. Deep, old pain that had been carefully hidden but never fully healed. You know what it is, she said. It wasn't a question. Sterling stood slowly, his mind racing. The operation that symbol represented had been his first command mission and his biggest failure. Codenamed Operation Ghostwalker, it was supposed to be a simple extraction of American civilians from a terrorist compound in Afghanistan. But everything had gone wrong. The intel was bad, the compound was a trap, and when the smoke cleared, 12 people were dead. Among the casualties was a family of aid workers who'd been captured by Taliban forces. The official report stated that David Chun and his wife Rebecca had been killed in the initial assault, along with their 8-year-old daughter. There were no survivors. But Sterling knew better. He'd been the one to find Rebecca Chun in the compound's basement, barely alive and clutching a small wooden carving. She'd pressed it into his hands and whispered something he'd never been able to forget. Promise me you'll find her. Promise me you'll find my daughter. Sterling had promised, but they'd never found a body. In the chaos of the firefight and the subsequent bombing that leveled the compound, they'd assumed the child was buried in the rubble. The symbol Rebecca Chun had given him was the same one, now carved into Maya's rifle. That's impossible, Sterling breathed, staring at the young woman before him. You would be 23 years old, Maya finished. Which is exactly how old I am. The pieces started falling into place in Sterling's mind, each one hitting like a physical blow. The missing background, the impossible skills, the psychological profile that showed no trauma because she'd learned to survive by becoming something that couldn't be traumatized anymore. Your mother carved that symbol, he said. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Before they killed her, Sterling felt like the floor was dropping away beneath him. But the report said there were no survivors. We searched everywhere. You searched for a little girl, Maya said, carefully closing the rifle case. But I wasn't hiding in the compound when your team arrived. The Taliban had already moved me to another location 2 days earlier. They kept me alive because they thought I might be useful. How did you? Sterling couldn't finish the question. Escape? Maya's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. I didn't escape, Admiral. I was rescued 3 years later by a Russian Special Forces unit that was conducting their own operation in the region. They found me, they trained me, and when I was old enough, they gave me a choice. Sterling's hands were shaking now. What choice? Hunt the people who destroyed my family, or spend the rest of my life wondering if they were still out there hurting other children. The silence in the room was deafening. Sterling could hear his own heartbeat, could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Everything he thought he knew about Operation Ghostwalker was crumbling around him. So you see, Admiral, Maya continued, her voice perfectly calm, I'm not here because the Pentagon assigned me to your unit. I'm here because I've spent 15 years tracking down everyone who was involved in the death of my family. And according to my research, you were the commanding officer who led that operation. Sterling's mind was racing, trying to process what he was hearing. Maya, if that's really who you are, then you need to understand something. That operation, it wasn't what you think it was. Really, Maya's voice carried a dangerous edge. Then please, by all means, explain to me what it really was. But before Sterling could answer, the lights in the conference room suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Through the windows, Sterling could see that the power was out across the entire base. Maya was already moving, her rifle case in her hands, heading toward the door with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to always have an escape route planned. This conversation isn't over, Sterling called after her. She paused at the door and looked back at him. In the red emergency lighting, her eyes seemed to glow. No, Admiral, she said. It's just beginning. And then she was gone, leaving Sterling alone in the darkened room with more questions than answers and the growing certainty that his past was about to become everyone's problem. Outside, alarms began to wail across the naval base, and Sterling realized that Maya's arrival wasn't just a coincidence. Someone else knew she was here, someone who didn't want this conversation to happen. The hunt was about to begin, but Sterling was no longer sure who was the hunter and who was the prey. The emergency lights cast dancing shadows across the corridors as Sterling moved quickly through the naval base. His radio crackled with reports of a security breach, but he knew better. This wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated this blackout to coincide with Maya's appearance, and that meant trouble was coming fast. Sterling's mind was still reeling from the revelation in the conference room. Rebecca Chin's daughter, alive. The little girl they'd failed to save had grown up to become one of the most deadly snipers in the world. But how had she ended up working for the American military if she blamed them for her family's death? As he rounded a corner near the armory, Sterling nearly collided with Lieutenant Commander Chun, who was leading a security team toward the main exit. Sir, we've got multiple contacts approaching the perimeter, Chun reported breathlessly. Thermal imaging shows at least 8 hostiles, heavily armed, moving in coordinated formation. Any idea who they are? Negative, sir, but they're using military-grade jamming equipment. All our communications are down except for short-range radio. Sterling grabbed Chen's shoulder. Listen to me carefully. There's a sniper on base who may be in immediate danger. Auburn hair, green eyes, goes by Maya. Find her and get her to the secure bunker in Building 7. Chen looked confused. Sir, isn't she our new asset? Why would she be in danger? Because I think someone followed her here. Before Chun could respond, the distinctive crack of a sniper rifle echoed across the base. Then another, and another. Sterling felt a chill run down his spine. Those weren't random shots. Someone was engaging targets with precision and speed that spoke of exceptional training. Change of plans, he told Chun. Get your team to the north perimeter. Support whoever's doing the shooting out there. Sterling broke away from the security team and headed toward the sound of gunfire. His instincts told him Maya was in the middle of whatever was happening, and if she really was Rebecca Chin's daughter, he owed it to her mother to make sure she survived the night. The base's layout worked in Sterling's favor as he navigated toward the perimeter. He'd walked these paths thousands of times over the years, and even in the emergency lighting, he could move quickly and quietly. As he approached the north fence line, Sterling could see muzzle flashes in the distance. The attackers had taken positions in the hills overlooking the base, using the elevated terrain to their advantage. But someone was returning fire from inside the perimeter, and whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. Sterling found Maya crouched behind a concrete barrier near the communications tower. She'd assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency and was systematically engaging targets in the hills. As Sterling watched, she fired once, adjusted her scope slightly, and fired again. Each shot was followed by a distant scream that cut off abruptly. "Impressive shooting," Sterling said, sliding into cover beside her. Maya didn't look away from her scope. 5 down, 3 to go. "But they're not trying to breach the base." "What do you mean?" "They're trying to pin me down until reinforcements arrive." Maya fired again, and another scream echoed from the hills. "This is a capture operation, not an assassination." Sterling processed this information quickly. "Someone wants you alive. The same someone who's been hunting me for the past 2 years." Maya finally looked at him, and Sterling could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "I was hoping I'd lost them when I made contact with your people." "Who are they?" Before Maya could answer, a new sound filled the air. The distinctive whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors approaching fast from the east. "That would be them," Maya said grimly. Sterling grabbed his radio. "All units, we have incoming aircraft, unknown intentions. Scramble air, support immediately." Static answered him. "Jamming is getting stronger," Maya observed. She lined up another shot and fired. 6 down. The helicopter came into view over the eastern hills, flying dark with no navigation lights. It was a military transport, the kind that could carry a full squad of special operations soldiers. But Sterling couldn't identify the specific model or nation of origin. "Maya, I need to know what we're dealing with here. Who's on that helicopter?" Maya worked the bolt of her rifle and chambered another round. "Remember when I told you the Russians rescued me? What I didn't mention is that they didn't do it out of kindness. They were conducting an operation to eliminate a Taliban commander who was developing chemical weapons. I was just a bonus." She fired again, and the 7th target went down. "They trained me, yes, but they also used me. For 3 years, I was their perfect weapon. Small enough to get into places adults couldn't, skilled enough to eliminate targets they couldn't reach through conventional means. But when I turned 18, I decided I wanted out." The helicopter was circling the base now, staying just outside the range of the base's defensive systems. "The Russians don't like it when their assets decide to retire," Maya continued. "Especially assets who know as much as I do about their operations." Sterling was beginning to understand. "So you defected to the Americans?" "I tried to. But apparently your people decided to verify my story by reaching out to Russian intelligence. Someone in your chain of command made a phone call they shouldn't have made." The helicopter was landing now, just outside the base perimeter. Sterling could see figures fast roping down from the aircraft, moving with the fluid coordination of elite special forces. "Spetsnaz," Maya said, confirming Sterling's fears. "Probably Alpha Group or Vimpel. They've been tracking me for 2 years, and someone just handed them my exact location." Sterling felt sick. The Pentagon's verification process had inadvertently signed Maya's death warrant. "We need to get you out of here," he said. Maya shook her head. "There's nowhere to run. They've got thermal imaging, satellite support, and enough resources to track me anywhere I go." She fired her last shot, eliminating the 8th sniper in the hills. "Besides, I'm tired of running. Maya, listen to me. Your mother made me promise to find you. I failed that promise for 25 years, but I'm not going to fail it tonight." For the first time since he'd met her, Maya looked genuinely surprised. "My mother spoke to you? She was dying when we found her. She gave me that symbol you carved into your rifle stock. Her last words were asking me to find you." Maya's composure cracked slightly, and Sterling caught a glimpse of the frightened child she'd once been. "She was trying to protect me," Maya whispered. "Even at the end, she was trying to protect me." The Russian forces were advancing across the open ground toward their position. Sterling counted at least 6 soldiers, all carrying assault rifles and moving in perfect formation. "We can't fight them here," Sterling said. "Too much open ground." Maya was quiet for a moment, her mind working through possibilities. Then she started disassembling her rifle with swift, practiced movements. "There's another way," she said. "But you're not going to like it." "What do you mean?" Maya finished packing her rifle and slung the case across her back. "The Russians trained me for 15 years. They think they know everything about how I operate, how I think, how I fight. But they're wrong about one thing. What's that? Maya's smile was cold and predatory. They trained me to be a sniper. But my mother was a doctor, and she taught me some things before she died. Things about anatomy, about pressure points, about how to kill people up close without making any noise. Sterling realized what she was suggesting. You want to take them hand to hand. 6 soldiers spread out across open ground, relying on thermal imaging and radio communication. If I can get close enough, I can take them down one by one before they know what's happening. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's better than letting them take me back to Moscow. Maya checked her sidearm and secured it in her holster. Besides, I've got an advantage they don't know about. What advantage? Maya looked at him with those unsettling green eyes. I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for my mother's memory. And there's nothing more dangerous than someone who has nothing left to lose. Before Sterling could argue, Maya was moving. She slipped away from their position like a shadow, heading directly toward the advancing Russian forces. Sterling wanted to call her back, wanted to find another way, but he knew she was right. Running would only delay the inevitable, and fighting conventionally would get them both killed. All he could do was watch as the daughter of the woman he'd failed to save 25 years ago walked directly into the most dangerous situation of her life. The night was about to become very bloody, and Sterling had the terrible feeling that before it was over, more secrets about Operation Ghostwalker were going to come to light. Secrets that might explain why the Russians were so determined to recapture Maya, and why someone in the American chain of command had been willing to betray her location. In the distance, Sterling could hear the Russian commander barking orders in accented English. They were confident, professional, and utterly unprepared for what was about to happen to them. Maya had vanished into the darkness like she'd never existed at all, and Sterling found himself praying that the woman she'd become was strong enough to survive the child she'd been forced to be. The silence was unnerving. For 20 minutes, Sterling had heard nothing from the darkness where Maya had disappeared. The Russian forces had stopped their advance, and their radio chatter had gone quiet. Even the emergency sirens on the base seemed muted, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Sterling crept forward from his position, using the scattered equipment and barriers around the communications tower as cover. His night vision goggles revealed the thermal signatures of the Russian soldiers, but they were no longer moving in formation. Instead, they appeared to be searching, their movements erratic and increasingly desperate. Then, Sterling saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the thermal signatures was lying motionless on the ground. Then another. Maya was out there in the darkness, and she was methodically eliminating some of the most elite soldiers in the world without making a sound. A brief flash of movement caught Sterling's attention. For just a moment, he glimpsed Maya sliding through the shadows behind a third Russian soldier. The man never knew what hit him. One second he was scanning the area with his rifle raised. The next he was crumpling to the ground. Sterling's radio crackled suddenly, startling him. Through the static, he heard a voice speaking Russian. Then, the transmission cut to English. Colonel Volkov to Maya, Chun. I know you can hear me. Sterling realized the Russians were using the base's own communication system against them, somehow bypassing the jamming they deployed. Your little game ends now, the voice continued. You've killed 3 of my men, but I have something you want. A new voice came over the radio, weak and clearly under duress. Maya? Maya, if you're out there, don't listen to him. Don't. The transmission was cut short by the sound of someone being struck. Sterling felt his world tilt. He recognized that voice. Older, hoarse with pain and fear, but unmistakable. Dr. David Chun, Maya's father. The man who was supposed to have died in Operation Ghostwalker 25 years ago. That's right, Volkov's voice returned. Your father is very much alive. He's been our guest for the past 2 decades, and he's been quite helpful in understanding exactly what happened during that botched American operation. Now you have a choice. Surrender yourself, or watch him die. Again, Sterling's mind was reeling. David Chin alive? That meant the intelligence they'd received 25 years ago was wrong, or deliberately falsified. But by whom and why? Movement in his peripheral vision caught Sterling's attention. Maya was approaching his position, moving like smoke through the darkness. When she reached his cover, Sterling could see she was wounded. Blood was seeping through her fatigues from what looked like a knife wound at her shoulder. "Did you hear?" she whispered. Sterling nodded. "Your father's alive. He's been alive this whole time." Maya's voice carried a bitterness that went deeper than Sterling had imagined possible. The Russians have been using him to develop medical techniques for their special forces. Enhanced healing, pain resistance, surgical procedures that can keep soldiers operational even with severe injuries. "How do you know that?" "Because for 3 years, while they were training me, he was the one patching me up after every mission. They never told me who he was. Just called him the doctor. I didn't realize until I was 16 and saw an old photograph that one of the guards was carrying." Sterling felt sick. "Maya, I swear to you, we had no idea. The reports all said—" "The reports were lies," Maya interrupted. "Someone in your command structure made a deal with the Russians. They fed you false intelligence about the compound, knowing your extraction team would walk into a trap. The question is why?" Before Sterling could respond, spotlights blazed to life around their position. The Russians had found them. Volkov's voice boomed across the base through loudspeakers. "Maya Chun, you have 30 seconds to show yourself, or your father dies." Maya checked her weapon and looked at Sterling. "I need you to do something for me." "Name it." "There's a secure terminal in Building 7, Level B2. Access code is Ghostwalker 77. Pull up the classified files on Operation Ghostwalker, all of them. Find out who authorized the mission parameters and who provided the intelligence." "Maya, you're not seriously thinking of surrendering." "I'm thinking of ending this." Maya stood and stepped into the spotlight. 25 years of questions, 20 years of my father being tortured, 15 years of my being used as a weapon. It ends tonight. Sterling grabbed her arm. "There has to be another way." Maya looked down at him, and in that moment, Sterling saw something that broke his heart. Despite everything she'd been through, despite the skills she'd learned and the people she'd killed, she was still that 8-year-old girl who'd lost her family. Still Rebecca Chin's daughter, trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. "Admiral," she said quietly, "my mother made you promise to find me. Well, you found me. Now I'm asking you to finish what she started. Find the truth about what really happened to my family." Maya stepped fully into the spotlight, her hands raised. Russian soldiers emerged from the darkness, weapons trained on her from multiple angles. "I'm here, Volkov," she called out. "Let my father go." Volkov himself appeared, a tall man in his 50s with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Behind him, 2 soldiers were dragging a frail, elderly man between them. Even from a distance, Sterling could see the resemblance between Maya and her father. The same green eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw. But Davidson looked like he'd aged 30 years in the past 25. His hair was completely white, his frame skeletal, and Sterling could see the telltale signs of long-term psychological trauma. "Let him go first," Maya demanded. Volkov laughed. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, little rabbit. But very well." The Russian soldiers released David Chun, who collapsed to his knees. Maya took a step toward him, but Volkov raised his hand. "That's close enough. You've caused me considerable trouble, Maya Alexandrovna. 3 of my best men dead. Years of careful planning disrupted. Moscow is not pleased. Moscow can kiss my—" Volkov backhanded her across the face, the crack echoing across the silent base. Maya's head snapped to the side, but she remained standing. "You forget yourself," Volkov said coldly. "You may have learned to kill, but you are still the same frightened little girl we found in that compound. And now you're coming home." "That was never my home." "No? Then, where is your home, Maya Alexandrovna? With the Americans who betrayed your location? With the family that abandoned you? You have no home. You have no one. You have only us." Sterling watched this exchange with growing rage. Every word from Volkov's mouth was calculated to break Maya's spirit, to remind her of her isolation and helplessness. But Sterling could see something Volkov couldn't. Maya wasn't broken. She was planning something. You're right, Maya said, her voice suddenly subdued. I don't have anyone. She began walking toward Volkov, her hands still raised. But as she moved, Sterling noticed she was positioning herself between the Russian colonel and her father. That's better, Volkov said. Acceptance is the first step toward. Maya moved faster than Sterling thought humanly possible. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the knife from Volkov's belt, spun behind him, and placed the blade against his throat. But you're wrong about one thing, she said. I do have someone. I have him. She nodded toward her father, who was struggling to stand. Maya, David Shun said, his voice cracking with emotion. My little girl, I thought you were dead. The Russian soldiers were shouting, weapons trained on Maya, but they couldn't fire without hitting their colonel. Stand down, Volkov ordered through gritted teeth. All of you stand down. Smart man, Maya said. Now, here's what's going to happen. You men are going to back away, slowly. Then you and I are going to have a conversation about who really ordered the attack on my family. I don't know what you mean. Maya pressed the knife deeper, drawing a thin line of blood. 25 years ago, someone in the American chain of command made a deal with Russian intelligence. They provided false information about a terrorist compound, knowing it would result in the death or capture of specific targets. My family wasn't collateral damage. We were the objective. Sterling felt the pieces clicking into place in his mind. Operation Ghostwalker hadn't been a rescue mission at all. It had been designed to fail from the beginning. The question, Maya continued, is what was so important about my parents that someone was willing to sacrifice an entire SEAL team to get them? Volkov was quiet for a long moment. Then, he laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You really don't know, do you? Know what? Your parents weren't aid workers, Maya Alexandrovna. Your father was a military physician who had been secretly developing enhanced interrogation techniques for the CIA. Your mother was a biochemist working on experimental truth serums. They discovered something that certain people in both governments wanted buried. The knife in Maya's hand trembled slightly. That's impossible. Is it? Why do you think the Russians wanted your father kept alive? Why do you think they spent so much time and resources training you? You weren't just a weapon, little rabbit. You were insurance. Sterling's radio crackled to life with his own voice, transmitted from Building 7. Admiral Sterling to all units. I've accessed the classified files. Maya, you need to hear this. Sterling's own voice continued over the radio, reading from classified documents he'd never seen before. Operation Ghostwalker was authorized by Deputy Director Marcus Caldwell, CIA. Objective: eliminate or capture Dr. David Shun and Dr. Rebecca Chun to prevent disclosure of Project Mindbridge, a joint Russian psychological warfare program. Method: provide false intelligence to SEAL Team 7, ensuring mission failure and target acquisition by Russian assets. The words hit Sterling like physical blows. He'd been used. His men had died because of a lie, and Maya's family had been deliberately sacrificed to protect a classified program that shouldn't have existed. Maya's grip on the knife tightened. Mindbridge. Volkov's smile was cold. A beautiful program, really. The Americans would develop the techniques, test them on volunteer subjects, and then share the results with us. In exchange, we would provide field testing in environments the Americans couldn't access. Your parents discovered the program was being tested on prisoners of war, on civilian populations, on children, and they threatened to expose it. They had already begun exposing it. They compiled evidence, made contact with journalists, prepared to bring down everyone involved. So certain people in both governments decided they needed to disappear. Maya looked across the open ground at Sterling, and he could see the devastating realization in her eyes. Everything she'd been through, everything she'd survived, everything she'd become, was the result of her own government's betrayal. The beautiful irony, Volkov continued, is that in trying to stop them from exposing Mindbridge, we created the perfect example of what the program could accomplish. You, Maya Alexandrovna, are the ultimate success story. A child traumatized and shaped into the perfect weapon, loyal to no one and capable of anything. But I'm not loyal to you, Maya said quietly. No, Volkov agreed, which is why this ends now. Sterling saw the flash of metal as Volkov drew a concealed pistol from his sleeve. Maya saw it too, but she was too close to dodge. Time seemed to slow as Sterling watched the Russian colonel bring the weapon up toward Maya's head. The shot that rang out across the base didn't come from Volkov's pistol. It came from Sterling's, who had moved into position during the confrontation and now had a clear line of sight. Volkov dropped to the ground, Sterling's bullet having found its mark. The Russian soldiers, suddenly leaderless and confused, hesitated just long enough for Maya to grab her father and dive for cover behind a concrete barrier. "Dad," Maya was saying, her voice breaking. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have found you sooner." "I should have no," David Chun said, placing a shaking hand on his daughter's cheek. "No, my brave girl. You survived. You became strong. That's all your mother and I ever wanted." Sterling approached their position, his weapon still drawn, but pointed away from the Russian soldiers, who seemed uncertain whether to fight or retreat. "Maya," he said, "we need to finish this. The people responsible for destroying your family are still out there." Maya looked up at him, tears streaming down her face for the first time since he'd met her. "Deputy Director Caldwell," she said, "among others. But the files will tell us everything we need to know." Maya stood, helping her father to his feet. The Russian soldiers were backing away, apparently deciding that their mission was over with Volkov dead. "What happens now?" she asked. Sterling looked at this young woman who had been through more trauma than anyone should have to endure, who had been shaped into a weapon by forces beyond her control, and who had still managed to retain enough humanity to risk everything to save her father. "Now," he said, "we make sure the people responsible pay for what they did." "All of them." Maya nodded, and Sterling could see a new determination in her eyes. Not the cold purpose of an assassin, but the focused anger of someone who had finally found a target worthy of her skills. "And after that," Sterling smiled, thinking of the promise he'd made to Rebecca Chen 25 years ago. "After that, you get to choose who you want to be. For the first time in your life, Maya Chun, you get to be free." As the sun began to rise over the naval base, Sterling realized that Maya's story wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. The frightened little girl was gone. The Russian weapon was gone. And in their place stood a woman who had learned the most important lesson of all, that the only person who could define her future was herself. The truth about Operation Ghostwalker would come out. The people responsible would face justice. And Maya Chan would finally have the chance to live the life her parents had died trying to give her. It had taken 25 years, but Admiral Marcus Sterling had finally kept his promise to a dying woman in a basement in Afghanistan. He had found her daughter, and he had brought her home.